Have you ever thought about what you would ask some of the people in the Bible when you get to meet them in heaven someday? Would you ask Paul exactly what that thorn in his side was all about? Would you ask Daniel what he was thinking when he was put in the fiery furnace? I suppose there's all kinds of questions we could ask. I would have a question for Moses. There's something that I'd like him to tell me about. And that's the basis of our lesson today. But before we say what that question is, let's back up and do a little review of Moses and the things the Bible records about him. The Egyptian Pharaoh was having all the Jewish baby boys killed to try to reduce the population of the Jews in Egypt. But Moses' mom put Moses in a basket in the river, and as it turned out, he was rescued by the daughter of the Pharaoh and then raised within the Pharaoh's royal household. When Moses was an adult, he saw how terribly the Egyptians treated the Jews and ended up killing an Egyptian guard to protect one of the Jewish slaves. And after that, he fled from Egypt. But God had other plans. So along comes the burning bush, where God speaks to Moses and tells him his job is to lead the people out of their bondage in Egypt. We won't retell the entire story of the Exodus, but let's look at some of the things that Moses did to accomplish the task that God had given him to do. First off, he was called upon to get over his fear of speaking. That's recorded in the Bible, and with the help of his brother Aaron, that is exactly what he did. Then he went to the Egyptian Pharaoh 10 times to demand that the Israelites be allowed to leave Egypt, each time warning the Pharaoh of a calamity that was going to come on Egypt if the Pharaoh didn't do what God said. When the Pharaoh finally relented, Moses led over 2 million Israelites out of Egypt. When Pharaoh's army decided to pursue the Israelites, they started to complain to Moses, but Moses stayed firm in his belief in God and led them through the Red Sea, with God holding the waters back on both sides. 3 days after crossing the Red Sea, the people started complaining again. So once again, Moses stayed true to God, and God responded by giving them water to drink and bread from heaven to eat. A little further into the wilderness, the people started grumbling about not having enough water again. And once again, Moses stood firm in his faith to God and struck the rock as God instructed, and water came forth for the people. Then Moses successfully led them to defend against the attack of the Amalekites. Moses also went up to the top of Mount Sinai, where God gave him the 10 Commandments. Moses came down from Mount Sinai to find the people worshiping an idol, a golden calf they had made. God was angry about this and told Moses his wrath would burn against them and consume them. But Moses interceded on their behalf, offering up his own life if God would forgive them and lead them on to the promised land. Moses ascended Mount Sinai a second time to once again get the 2 tablets of stone for the 10 Commandments, after the first stones were destroyed in disgust when he came down the first time and saw the people sinning and worshiping false gods. Moses oversaw the construction of the tabernacle. He oversaw the building of the Ark of the Covenant. He handed down the law and organized the Israelites so that they could live according to the law and covenant. He was the Israelites' tireless leader, always standing firm in his faith in God, setting that example for them time and time again. Through all the moaning and complaining, Moses stood firm in his trust in God, doing over and over again what God instructed him to do. So it's no wonder Exodus 33:11 says, "Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend." Moses was a friend of God. Talk to him face to face. How amazing is that? But now we come to the part that generates my question for Moses. The question I think about asking him someday. Deuteronomy 32, 48 through 52 says, "That very day the Lord spoke to Moses, 'Go up on the mountain of Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, and view the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the people of Israel for a possession. And die on the mountain which you go up, and be gathered to your people, as Aaron your brother died in Mount Or, and was gathered to his people. Because you broke faith with me in the midst of the people of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, and because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the people of Israel. For you shall see the land before you, but you shall not go there, into the land that I am giving to the people of Israel.'" Really? Really? After all that Moses did, after all the times he defended God to the Israelites, after all the times he stood firm in his faith, after the 40 years in the wilderness, he doesn't get to go into the promised land? And why? Why would God do that? We don't have to guess. God tells Moses exactly why. "Because you broke faith with me in the midst of all the people of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, and because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the people of Israel." What's that about? That's about God telling him on this occasion to speak to the rock and water would come forth. But he struck the rock, not what God told him to do. To his defense, the previous time, God did tell him to strike the rock. So Moses was just doing what God had told him to do the previous time. He was just doing what he had done before. And because he didn't do the second time what God specifically told him to do, he didn't get to go into the promised land. He got to see it, but after all he had done, he didn't get to go in. So, my question to Moses is this: do you think that's fair? After all you did, after all those years in the desert, after standing up for God over and over and over again, does it seem fair that you didn't get to enter the promised land because you struck a rock instead of speaking to it? I don't know what Moses would say, but I think it might be something like this: God is a loving God. God is a righteous God. God is my friend. And I trust him, and he doesn't make wrong decisions. My response would be, yeah, but... And Moses would probably cut me off and say, but nothing. Don't question God. Do what he says, when he says to do it, and how he says to do it. Honor God all the time without exception. Don't fall back. Don't fall back on what you used to do. Don't get lazy or comfortable thinking you've got it all figured out. Don't make up your own rules. Don't pick and choose what things you want to do and what things you don't want to do. Don't get clever and do things in a different way than what God has told you to do. If you want to keep growing as a saint in God's family, do what God tells you to do, when he tells you to do it, and how he tells you to do it. That's all speculation on my part. I don't know what Moses would say if I ask him that question. But by reading the Bible, by looking at the life of Moses, at his faithfulness, I believe that there is a clear message for us. A message that God used Moses to teach us. That message is this: if we want to grow as Christians, to walk in deeper faith, to let God's light shine brightly in the world, then the story of Moses ought to make one message loud and clear. We are to do what God tells us to do, when he tells us to do it, and how he tells us to do it. This message from Moses weighs heavy on my heart, to be honest. I live in a society that tells me it's all about me, that I should be able to do what I want to do the way I want to do it. But society must not be our God. God must be our God. And if we want to grow closer to Him, stronger in our Christian faith and maturity, Moses has a message for us. Do what God says to do, when He tells us to do it, and how He tells us to do it. I hope this message is beneficial for you. Next time we're going to look at a few words from Jesus about how we need to approach things. Words that we unfortunately sort of ignore too often. In the meantime, I hope you'll spend some time thinking about this message from Moses. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.